My YouTube channel, TikTok channel, Instagram page, One Race, Human Race, All Human. None of this should be surprising on this Wednesday, April 12th, 2023. If you go back to when free labor and free family activity, right, or free Netflix and chill from slavery, which, what is that? Free labor, you work night and day, day and night, you paid zero, right? In the 19th century, black men and white men voted together in fusion coalitions, according to Reverend Dr. Martin King Jr. Listen to his speech from March 25th, 1965. Black men and white men voted in fusion coalitions, not concerned about the color of skin, but they voted economics. In fact, the Civil Rights Act of 1875 was passed. You know what it says? Treat everyone equally. Then the Supreme Court gutted that in 1883. And then when you had the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, signed on July 2nd, 1964, Dr. Martin King Jr. Check this out at one of his Stanford speeches. He said the 64 Act is weaker than the 1875 Civil Rights Act. What's the point? None of what's happening right now on Wednesday, April 12th, 2023, should be unusual, should be a surprise to anyone who knows American history. The past is prologue.
In life and in politics, you can tell a lot about a person by the company they keep, or in the case of the twice impeached, disgraced, now indicted ex-president, the people they praise loudly on Fox News. For years, Donald Trump has lauded enthusiastically authoritarian rulers across the globe, and last night on Fox, he did it again.
They're all top of the line. Our guy's not top of the line. Never was. These are top of the line people at the top of their game. President Xi is a brilliant man. If you went all over Hollywood to look for somebody to play the role of President Xi, you couldn't find it. There's nobody like that. The look, the brain, the whole thing. We had a great relationship. How smart is Kim Jong-un? Top of the line. You know, people say, oh, this and that. Really smart. Putin, very smart.
I don't even know where to start. No one called you top of the line, ever. Our friend Charlie Sykes wrote this. War crimes, genocide, murders, not something that the GOP frontrunner seems to care about, but we knew that, didn't we? We don't typically amplify any of Trump's wild rides or anything, frankly, that's on Fox News. But in covering the Tennessee Republicans, in covering the restricted bans on abortion, in covering the 400 plus voter suppression laws, it's important to understand they're not bodily functions. They're not burping out random policies. They're following their leader, who's following the world's most heinous authoritarians. And we showed you that to show you just how dangerous his rhetoric is as applied from the top to the bottom at the national, state, and local level of the Republican Party in America. It's that message and that firm embrace, no dog whistles, top of the line. These people are top of the line. They're at the top of their game. Literally no one in Hollywood is good enough to play them in the movie. What movie? That is the message the party's getting from their leader. We know how indebted they are to him. It's no surprise the members are moving away from democratic norms. Not just American democratic norms, but the world's democracies have a set of norms. Republicans are not so into them anymore. They're now engaging in authoritarian practices like enacting inhumane abortion bans, expelling political opponents from serving in state legislatures, and targeting reporters. Joining our coverage, former Obama Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes, plus former Republican Congressman David Jolly. Ketty Kay is here, U.S. Special Correspondent for BBC Studios. They're all MSNBC contributors. I'll say this to you, David Jolly. He's such an idiot on top of all else. And he sounds like such a bleeping idiot.
Yeah, listen, it's somewhat easy to absorb his ignorance now, 6 to 7 years in, and question his intent, right? Because here's the thing, it's actually very dangerous what he just did. You know, he's been normalized, but understand even his comments about President Xi Jinping of of China. Right now, in the world, in the region, China has just finished a very aggressive exercise where they surrounded Taiwan. The U.S. is on the eve of an escalated exercise in response, much larger than past years. This is a critical geopolitical national security region. And so when Donald Trump, as a former president, says, our current guy, Joe Biden, doesn't know what he's doing, and the president of China really does, that actually has significant reverberations. Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, recently called what's happening in the region a really big deal. And so in the past, former presidents would have kept their mouths shut or would have backed up the sitting president. We now live in a world in which Donald Trump goes into these interviews, and whether it's ignorance or intent, leaves a very dangerous message on the world stage. And we have to continue to call it out when we hear it.
We have to continue to reckon with the fact that as a country and as a democracy, Ben Rhodes, we have not held Trump accountable for brazen crimes against our democracy. And there are some who are uncomfortable with our constant focus on Merrick Garland's Justice Department. But the truth is, when your political parties crumble, when they're corrupted from the top to the bottom, when they call an insurrection a normal tourist visit, when Mitch McConnell gets up at the end of a trial in which he acquits Donald Trump and says, well, there's always the criminal justice system. He can be held to account there. Fairly or not, it all falls to the rule of law to hold the democracy together. How are we doing on that front?
Well, I mean, incomplete, Nicole. And look, I'm really watching those clips. I mean, I wrote a whole book about this subject of Trump and the Republican Party and the commonality with these other leaders. But the reason it's important is, in addition to just expressing this admiration, Trump and really the Republican Party that has implemented some of these changes, they've copied the playbook of people like Viktor Orban, people like Vladimir Putin himself, in terms of rolling back democratic protections, treating the rule of law as something that you can, like a menu, where you choose it when you want it, you use it when you want it, and you discard it when you don't want it. And what has been proven time and again is if you don't stop that kind of power grab, there's no reason to think that the autocratic party will stop itself. Like, there's just not any precedent. If you look around the world at all these systems that have moved in a more autocratic direction, it's not like at a certain point, the parties that have made a conscious decision to go down this path of undoing democratic norms and undermining the rule of law, they don't stop themselves. They need to be stopped. They need to be stopped at the ballot box, and they need to be stopped by the enforcement of the rule of law. And I think this speaks to that. And by the way, this is very clear to people in other parts of the world. Dave Jolly mentioned what's going on in Asia. Well, another thing that happened recently is Emmanuel Macron going over to China for a few days, being very cozy with Xi Jinping. A lot of people wondered, well, what's he doing this for in the middle of the war in Ukraine with China backing Russia? He's doing it in part because he and every other Democratic leader feels that they need to hedge against Donald Trump coming back. As long as they're looking at the Republican Party and seeing what's going on in this country and knowing that there's a kind of roughly 50% chance in the divided country that we're going to get Trump or somebody like him again, they're not going to trust the word of the United States, even with Joe Biden in there, without, hedging and going to a Xi Jinping, who Donald Trump calls top of the line. And keep in mind, Donald Trump has never praised our Democratic allies. It's not like he calls Justin Trudeau or Angela Merkel or Emmanuel Macron top of the line. He has nothing but bad things to say about small d Democrats. That is a message that people around the world watch. And if they see a U.S. system that is incapable of holding people accountable when they violate the law and try to overthrow the government, they're going to wonder about our system.
Yeah, and Katie, I would go even further on the autocratic point. I think there's this sense that we have time. We don't have any more time. Republicans are wrapped in Orban's, you know what. CPAC has been held there for years now. That seal has been broken. They have shown us who they are. And the people who want to continue to live in a democracy, I think, feel like there are other fights. They're all the same fight. The other side has wrapped all of their efforts to strip away rights.
See, part of this is responding to the Southern strategy 24/7 and bringing people together. Remember I mentioned 19th century, how Reverend Dr. Martin King Jr. in his March 25th, 1965 speech, where he said in the 19th century, black and white men voted together in fusion coalitions, voted economics, not concerned about color of skin. How they stopped that? Segregation. and the Southern Strategy. Okay? The Southern Strategy, something that's been going on for really centuries. Getting white Americans to vote against their own economic interests. Great example, Mandela Barnes, right? Lieutenant Governor of Wisconsin, running for United States Senate. And here he is for programs to help the elderly. And he loses by 26,000 votes to someone who said, hey, let's go ahead and reevaluate Social Security, every year. And you had white voters voting, older white voters voting against their own economic interests. And part of that is you have to respond to that, the racist commercials. Okay, I don't know how Mandela Barnes did it specifically, but you also have those commercials running in New York State. All right, and according to Cornell Belcher, he said they were there to. You can look at one of my YouTube videos, a couple of them on this, trying to scare white people, which they did. Okay, and they voted against their own economic interests. So the Southern Strategy is still working very, very well. Also, not in Wisconsin. Also, what happened was you had a Republican leader there talk about how we were able to get people off the roll, right? And so people who should have been voting, they took them off the rolls, right, or challenged them, and that's another reason why Mandela Barnes lost. It was very, very close, tremendous, amazing. But my point is that you have to deal with the Southern Strategy. You might need that 2% or that 3% of those white voters, seniors, to vote for the Democratic candidate in order to win. But if you allow the Southern Strategy to continue without being responded to, you have to respond to it. How do you respond to it? One race, human race, all human. Everyone has a right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Everyone wants to have food in their stomach, clothes on their back, shoes on their feet, shelter over their head. Free state education for everyone, like most of the world, right? A lot of the world has that, right? Free healthcare for everyone. Go back and take a look at President John F. Kennedy's speech from Madison Square Garden on May 20th, 1962, where he's trying to get what would become Medicare passed, right? Which he wasn't able to. Okay, and they were saying, all these problems you're going to have. Hey, now people love it. My point is that, again, they use divide and conquer. And one reason we don't, look at Social Security and the compromise that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had to make. Look at history, okay? So very important. Bring people together, one race, human race, all human. We may have come on different ships, but we're all in the same boat now together. And all boats must rise together. Doesn't matter what you look like, black, white, red, yellow, green, purple, gay, straight. It doesn't. Hey, we're all human beings. We're all made in the image of God. God loves us all equally. And everyone has a right on this planet known as Earth to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
To disenfranchise the voters of Tennessee by expelling their members, to make sure that anyone and everyone who wants a gun can get a gun and no one can ever have access to health care if they're a woman. I mean, it is all part of a piece on their side, in their telling. And I worry sometimes that people think, democracy, we'll deal with that later. We have to fight for this first. Do you feel like the fight is a fair one in our country?
I just came back from a few weeks in Europe, and it was really noticeable the degree to which Europeans are looking at what's happening inside American politics and having kind of thought that the country would change after Donald Trump left office. They've been really struck by how little it has and how much the rollback of rights around reproductive rights, for example, or the disconnect between the organs of American government and the will of the American people on things like guns or things like abortion seem to be incapable of addressing America's problems. So there seems to be a systemic problem with American democracy, whoever is sitting in the White House. And that's the kind of thing I think that alarms.
Again, let's look at history. When the country got started, 1776, could women vote? No. 1876, no. 1906, no. 1960, no. 1920, women in the Constitution, 19th Constitution got the right to vote. When did black women get the right to vote? August 6, 1965, right? In the South, okay? All right? And black men also got the right to vote again. So democracy for all people in America is relatively new. What happened on March 25th, 1911? The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, right? Where they had the poor immigrants, horrible, the Italian ladies and Irish ladies and Jewish ladies and other immigrants there. Fire broke out. The doors were all locked. They had to jump out of windows. Look at that. History. They were being racist against immigrants. Okay? Now, later on, they all became white, you know. By how society looks at them. But it's still wrong what happened to them. And the first female cabinet member of the history of United States of America, Secretary Lillian Perkins, who would later become the Secretary of Labor, was there in New York City and saw it. My point is, all life is equally valuable. And by the way, Democrats, you have to be very clear that the Republicans in general are not concerned once the child is born. They believe in what? Forced government birth, right? Although they want to do what they want with a lady's bodily autonomy, right? The men want to tell them what to do, Republican men. However, when it comes to AR-16s, don't touch that. And by the way, Democrats need to make the point that President Clinton passed the assault weapons ban back in 1994, and George Bush the son and the Republican Party allowed to expire in 2004, right? And bring up the data about how shootings and things went down during that period of time. You have to point this out to the American public over and over and over again. Republican Party in general are okay with 12-year-olds becoming mothers. And by the way, once they become mothers, they want to cut all the programs. You've got to call this out. Just as the representative there got expelled, Justin Pearson, right? Pointed it out, okay? And the other Justin Jones too, represented, and others, okay? Talk to the American public clearly. One race, human race, all human. Everyone has a right to life, liberty, freedom, happiness. Everyone on this planet known as Earth.
Those Europeans, particularly those who have long looked to America for leadership, and of course, America has led on Ukraine, and Europeans are incredibly grateful for that, and they acknowledge that. But there is something about America's inability to deal with problems that the American public tell pollsters they want dealing with, that is alarming whoever wins the next election, because the country doesn't seem to be able to deal with those problems.
Yeah, and I mean, I think our politics still get pushed through a business as usual sieve, David Jolly. The truth is, if it's a rematch of Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, only one of them is going to work to make sure that everybody still lives in a democracy. Yeah. Only one of them is interested in making sure that every Republican and every Democrat in this country has access to government, support of public services. The other one is for burning it all down. And I feel like we're still a little precious in our too big, Princess and the Pea, looking for something perfect. The democracy is on fire.
Yeah, Nicole, democracy is on the brink in 2024, truly. If we see the return of Donald Trump, who has promised to be an agent of retribution, or even one of his acolytes and Ron DeSantis and others, reflecting the norms of today's Republican Party. Look, there are actors in today's Republican Party, Donald Trump being first and foremost, who will shred the Constitution and violate law to get the end result that they ultimately desire. And it reflects what you see in authoritarians around the world. It quiets speech, it quiets diversity of thought. It is very hard anti-immigration. It quashes fundamental rights. That is now the ends, and any means are justified to achieve those for today's Republican Party. And after the leaders of today's Republican Party, honestly, I don't think any other Republicans are smart enough to see their own movement within their own party. They're just tribal about it, which is why going into 2024, the most important coalition in the United States is a coalition of Democrats, independents, and disaffected Republicans led by today's Democratic Party. And I just have to call out in this moment The movement to try to run a third party or independent presidential candidate could be absolutely disastrous. This is the wrong cycle. The Democratic-led coalition in 24 is the one that will protect American democracy. It is critical that they prevail.
Just gave me a chill. Since we've been on, I mean, another state, I think, I don't want to get it wrong, has banned drag shows. No child has been killed in elementary school by a traveling drag show. It's insane. No one's going anywhere, not today. When we come back, we're going to bring into this conversation Congressman Jim Himes of the House Intelligence Committee on this and the domestic blowback around those leaked intelligence documents.